At 2:30 a.m. on the 18th of September, 1872, a horse-drawn wagon pulled to a stop at the corner of Westminster and Dorrance Streets in Providence, Rhode Island. The wagon was not carrying produce or dry goods. It was fitted with a wooden counter, a few stools, and a small stove. The operator, a young entrepreneur named Walter Scott, began serving coffee, sandwiches, and eggs to night workers leaving the nearby newspaper offices and factories. The idea was simple: provide hot food at hours when other restaurants were closed. That first night, Scott sold out within 2 hours. He returned the next evening and the next. Within a month, he had regular customers who called his wagon the Night Owl Lunch Wagon. By the end of that year, Scott had saved enough to buy a second wagon. What happened next was not an accident of one man's ambition. It was the beginning of a transformation in how Americans ate, worked, and gathered. Scott's lunch wagon was not the first mobile food cart in the country, but it was the first to standardize the experience. He kept the menu short, the prices low, and the hours long. Other men saw this success and copied it. By 1880, dozens of lunch wagons operated in Providence, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. They were all horse-drawn, all parked overnight in busy commercial districts, and all served working-class men who needed a meal in the middle of the night. The wagons faced legal challenges. City ordinances banned street vendors from staying in one spot for too long, but the operators adapted. They found alleys, side streets, and factory gates where enforcement was lax. The wagons became fixtures of the urban nightscape. By 1885, a man named Thomas H. Buckley had opened a lunch wagon in Worcester, Massachusetts that introduced a crucial innovation. Instead of serving from an open counter, Buckley enclosed the entire wagon with a roof and side panels. He added a row of fixed stools inside. This was the first true diner, a mobile building designed exclusively for serving food with the customer seated inside, protected from the weather. Buckley's design became the template. Other manufacturers soon began building lunch wagons to order. The wagons were built with wood frames, painted white or cream, with large windows, a counter, and a grill. They were pulled by horses to a location and parked on wooden blocks. The wheels could be removed, but the building itself remained movable. In 1891, the first rolling restaurant was built by the Worcester Lunch Car Company, which would become one of the most famous diner builders in history. For the next 30 years, the lunch wagon industry grew slowly. The wagons were still considered temporary structures, often viewed with suspicion by city officials who preferred permanent brick restaurants. But the customers kept coming. The wagons appealed to a broad cross-section of Americans: night shift workers, late-night drinkers, early-morning commuters, and travelers who needed a reliable meal. The menu expanded from simple sandwiches to hamburgers, hot dogs, hash, pie, and coffee. The counter became a place where people from different backgrounds sat side by side. There was no dividing line between rich and poor, black and white, though segregation would later be enforced in many diners. In those early decades, the diner was seen as a democratic space, a rarity in a stratified country. The real breakthrough came with the automobile. As cars became common in the 1910s and 1920s, the demand for roadside food exploded. Lunch wagons could be moved to new locations near highways, intersections, and tourist attractions, but horses could not compete with trucks. In 1919, a manufacturer named Philip Patchett built the first all-steel lunch wagon. It was mounted on a truck chassis and could be driven to a site. The design was stronger, cleaner, and easier to mass-produce. Patchett's company, the Patchett Lunch Wagon Company, sold dozens of these units across the Midwest. Other manufacturers soon entered the market. The Jerry O'Mahony Diner Company began in 1912 in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and by the 1920s was building hundreds of diners per year. O'Mahony's diners were shipped by rail to locations across the country. They arrived as complete units, a prefabricated building with a counter, stools, kitchen, ventilation, and lighting. The buyer simply had to choose a site, pour a foundation, and connect the utilities. O'Mahony's catalogs offered multiple sizes and styles, from a small 12-stool model to a large 30-stool diner with a back room. By 1930, there were thousands of diners across the United States. They were concentrated in the Northeast and Midwest, but they appeared in the South and West as well. The Great Depression slowed construction, but the diner survived because it offered cheap, filling food. A meal at a diner cost 10 to 35 cents. For many families, it was the only affordable meal outside the home. The diner became a lifeline. World War II halted production of new diners as materials were diverted to the war effort, but the existing diners stayed open. They served soldiers on leave, defense plant workers, and civilians who needed a place to gather. The diner's role as a community anchor deepened. After the war, the pent-up demand for dining and mobility exploded. Diners entered their golden age. The timeline now accelerates. In 1946, the Paramount Diners Company introduced the sleek stainless steel diner with a curved roof and neon signage. This became the classic image of the American diner. Other manufacturers like Coleman, Fodero, and Der Raphael followed suit. They built diners with chrome trim, terrazzo floors, marble countertops, and backlit menus. The diner was no longer just a lunch wagon. It was a piece of Americana designed to look like a streamlined train or a jetage lounge. By 1950, there were an estimated 6,000 diners operating in the United States. They were mostly independent businesses owned by families, many of them Greek, Italian, or Jewish immigrants who saw the diner as a path to the middle class. The typical diner was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It served breakfast all day. It had a menu of 40 to 60 items. It was a place where a man could sit alone with a newspaper, where a family could share a pie, and where a trucker could eat a full meal at 3 in the morning. What happened? How did a horse-drawn lunch wagon become a national symbol? To understand this transformation, we have to step back from the counter and look at the systems that made the diner possible. The first system was manufacturing. The prefabricated diner was an industrial product. It was built in a factory, not on site. This allowed for consistent quality, lower costs, and rapid deployment. The diner was a piece of infrastructure as much as a building. It could be mass-produced and shipped anywhere by rail or truck. This turned the diner into a franchise of design, though not of ownership. Each diner looked similar, but each was run by a different owner. This blend of uniformity and individuality mirrored the American ideal of democratic enterprise. The second system was transportation. The diner existed because of the highways and railways that carried people and goods. The diner's success was tied to the mobility of the American population. The automobile created the roadside and the diner filled it. The diner also depended on the supply chains that brought fresh ingredients, coffee, and produce from farms to counters. This was not a high-end restaurant, it was a logistical machine that turned raw materials into fast, cheap meals. The third system was labor. Diner owners worked long hours, often with little help. The staff was small, a cook, a counterman, a dishwasher. Many owners worked behind the counter themselves. The labor was grueling, the margins thin, but the diner offered a path to independence. For immigrant communities, the diner was a gateway business. You could start with a small unit, learn the trade, and expand. The diner became a story of entrepreneurship, even as it demanded every waking hour from its owners. The fourth system was regulation. Diners faced health inspections, zoning laws, and food safety codes, but they operated in a gray area for years. Many were considered temporary, so they escaped property taxes and building permits. This legal flexibility kept costs down and allowed the diner to thrive in niches where other restaurants could not survive. Over time, municipalities tightened rules, but the diner had already established itself as a permanent fixture of the streetscape. The fifth system was culture. The diner became a symbol because it was photographed, painted, and written about. Artists and writers like Edward Hopper, who painted Nighthawks in 1942, captured the diner's loneliness and intimacy. Television shows like Happy Days and movies like Diner and Pulp Fiction cemented the diner as a backdrop for American stories. The diner was a stage for everyday drama, a place where a proposal happened, a deal was made, a friendship was renewed, a stranger became a regular. It stood for authenticity in an increasingly mass-produced world. The sixth system was nostalgia. As fast food chains like McDonald's and Burger King spread in the 1960s and 1970s, the independent diner began to decline. The shiny new burger stands ate into the diner's customer base. The rise of shopping malls and strip malls pulled business away from downtown and roadside locations. Many diners closed or were torn down, but the ones that survived became treasured. They were no longer just restaurants, they were artifacts of a disappearing way of life. People who had never worked in a diner came to love the idea of the diner as a symbol of simple, honest food and neighborly connection. Today, there are still about 2,000 classic diners in operation in the United States. Most are in the Northeast, with clusters in New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts. Some have been restored as historic landmarks. Others have been updated but kept their original chrome and neon. The diner is now a cultural icon, recognized around the world as shorthand for American roadside culture. But the story is not over. The diner faces new challenges: rising rents, labor shortages, competition from fast casual chains and delivery apps. The question is whether the diner can adapt again or whether it will fade into a memory. We are only at the beginning of that story. In the next segment, we will trace the diner's journey through the mid-20th century, the rise and fall of the franchise diner, and the efforts to preserve what remains. The diner's future is uncertain, but its past is rich with lessons about how a simple idea, a horse-drawn wagon with a hot stove, became one of the most enduring symbols of American life. At 5 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in June 1952, a truck pulled up to a vacant lot on Route 1 in Linden, New Jersey. It carried a stainless steel diner built by the Coleman Dining Car Company. The driver, a veteran named Frank, had left the factory in Avenel at 2:30 a.m. The diner was a Model 452, 30 feet long, with a curved roof, chrome trim, and a neon sign that read Linden Diner. Frank backed the truck onto the concrete foundation that had been poured the previous week. By 7 a.m., the diner was in place. The owner, a Greek immigrant named Nick, had arrived at 4 a.m. with his wife and 2 sons. They began setting up the kitchen, stocking the refrigerator, and polishing the counter. At 6 a.m., the first customer walked in. He was a truck driver who had been waiting for hours. Nick poured him a cup of coffee. The diner was open. What happened in the years that followed was not just the story of one diner, it was the story of thousands. The post-war boom transformed the American landscape. Suburbs spread, highways multiplied, the automobile became a necessity. And the diner, once a fixture of the downtown and the rail yard, moved to the roadside. Between 1945 and 1960, more than 2,000 new diners were manufactured and installed across the country. Most were built in the northeastern corridor from Boston to Washington, D.C., but diners also appeared in the Midwest, the South, and the West. They were shipped by rail and truck, often in pieces, then reassembled on site. The diner of the 1950s was a different machine than its predecessor. The early lunch wagons were cramped and dark. The diners of the 1950s were functional but plain. The post-war diner was designed to attract attention. It gleamed. The stainless steel exterior reflected headlights and streetlights. The neon sign glowed red and blue. The windows were large and clear, so passers-by could see the counter, the stools, the waitresses in their uniforms. The interior was bright with fluorescent lighting, tile floors, and backlit menus showing color photographs of hamburgers, milkshakes, and pie. The diner was not just a place to eat, it was a billboard for itself. The menu expanded. Breakfast was served all day: eggs, pancakes, bacon, sausage, toast, coffee. Lunch and dinner offered burgers, hot dogs, club sandwiches, meatloaf, chicken pot pie, liver and onions, fish and chips. Dessert was pie, cake, pudding, or ice cream. The diner had no alcohol in many cases, beer was sometimes available, but the diner was a family place. The specialty was the combination of speed, price, and variety. A customer could order a hamburger and coffee, receive it in under 3 minutes, pay 35 cents, and be on their way. Or they could sit for an hour and read the newspaper. The diner accommodated both. The ownership model shifted slightly. Many diners were still owned by individuals, frequently of Greek, Italian, or Jewish background. But chains began to appear. The Howard Johnson's chain, started in 1925, had already established a system of standardized restaurants with orange roofs. By the 1950s, Howard Johnson's had over 400 locations, many of them built as roadside diners. But the company-owned or franchised diner was not the majority. Most diners were independent. The independence was both a strength and a vulnerability. The owner could make decisions quickly, adapt to local tastes, build personal relationships with customers, but the owner also bore all the risk. There was no corporate safety net. How did the diner survive the rise of fast food? The answer is that it did not entirely. In 1955, Ray Kroc opened the first McDonald's in Des Plaines, Illinois. By 1960, there were over 200 McDonald's locations. By 1970, there were over 3,000. The fast food model was built on efficiency, a limited menu, assembly line preparation, and low prices. The diner could not compete on speed or cost. A McDonald's hamburger cost 15 cents. A diner hamburger cost 35 cents. The diner took longer to prepare. The diner also required more staff. The fast food restaurant could operate with a handful of teenagers. The diner needed a cook, a counterman, a dishwasher, and sometimes a waitress. The response from the diner industry was not uniform. Some diners added drive-through windows. Others shortened their menus. Some turned into coffee shops or pancake houses. But many diners simply closed. By the mid-1970s, the number of diners in the United States had fallen from an estimated 6,000 to about 3,000. The ones that survived were in cities or along highways that still had traffic. They were often the ones that had established a loyal clientele. They were the ones where the owner still worked behind the counter. At 8:30 p.m. on a Friday night in October 1974, a fire broke out in the kitchen of a diner in Union City, New Jersey. The diner, called the Union City Diner, had been in operation since 1946. The fire started in a deep fryer. The owner, a man named George, tried to put it out with a fire extinguisher, but the grease fire spread. By the time the fire department arrived, the diner was engulfed. The building was a total loss. George had no insurance that covered fire damage. He had been paying the bills by the skin of his teeth. The diner never reopened. This story repeated itself across the country, but not all stories ended in loss. In 1983, a diner in Worcester, Massachusetts, was purchased by a couple who had grown up in the neighborhood. They renovated the interior, kept the original counter and stools, added a new grill, and reopened. Business was slow at first, but word spread. The diner became a meeting place. By the 1990s, it was thriving. The owners had not changed the menu much, eggs, burgers, pie, but they had changed the atmosphere. They hosted community events, put up local art, and treated the regulars as family. The diner survived because it adapted, not by becoming something else, but by becoming more of itself. The preservation movement began in the 1980s. Diners had historically been seen as disposable buildings. They could be moved, sold, or demolished, but as the classic diners vanished, people started to notice. Local historical societies campaigned to save diners. The National Register of Historic Places added some diners to its list. In 1991, the Worcester Diner, built in 1948 by the Worcester Lunch Car Company, was designated a historic landmark. It was one of the first. Today, there are about 2,000 classic diners still standing, but fewer than 500 are considered historically preserved. The rest operate in some form, but many have been remodeled beyond recognition. At 3 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday in March 2004, a delivery truck arrived at a diner in Hudson, New York. The diner had been closed for 10 years. The truck contained a new HVAC system, a new refrigerator, and a new countertop. The building was a 1951 Paramount diner, painted white with blue trim. The new owners, a young couple from Brooklyn, had bought it for $60,000. They spent 2 years restoring it. They stripped the old paint from the stainless steel, replaced the neon sign, and rebuilt the kitchen. They reopened in 2006. The diner now serves organic eggs, grass-fed beef, and craft coffee. The prices are higher. The customer base is different, but the building is still a diner. This restoration is part of a larger trend. In the 2000s and 2010s, a wave of new owners, often younger and more affluent, bought up old diners and revived them. They kept the classic form but updated the menu and the business model. These diners cater to a clientele that values nostalgia and authenticity. The food is better according to some. The prices are higher. The wait times are longer, but the diner survives. What does this mean? The diner is no longer a working-class staple in the same way. It has become a symbol of a past that people want to experience, even if only for an hour over a burger and a shake. The diner is now a historical artifact that people pay to see. This is not necessarily a bad thing. Preservation is better than demolition, but it changes the diner's role. The diner is no longer a necessity, it is a luxury. It is no longer a place for a cheap meal, it is a place for an experience. The systems that made the diner possible are still in place, but they have changed. Manufacturing of new classic diners has nearly ceased. The last company building traditional stainless steel diners, the Der Raffel Manufacturing Company in New Rochelle, New York, still operates, but it builds mostly modern versions. The supply chain for ingredients has consolidated, the labor pool has shrunk, the regulatory environment has tightened. The diner now competes with fast casual chains like Chipotle and Panera, as well as delivery apps like DoorDash and Uber Eats. The diner's model of slow service and fixed location is at odds with the on-demand economy. Yet the diner endures. It endures because it offers something that no app can provide: a physical place where people sit next to strangers, where the coffee is always hot, where the waitress knows your name. The diner is a third place, not home, not work, but somewhere in between. This concept, popularized by sociologist Ray Oldenburg, describes the informal gathering places that bind communities together. The diner is a classic third place. It is democratic. Anyone can walk in. No one checks your credentials. The only requirement is that you order something, and even that is negotiable if you are a regular. The story of the American diner is not over. It continues to evolve. The newest wave involves food trucks, which are essentially lunch wagons on wheels, returning to the original concept. Some food trucks have fixed locations and become permanent. Some food trucks grow into brick-and-mortar restaurants. The cycle repeats. The diner's DNA is everywhere: in the coffee shop, the breakfast joint, the truck stop, the greasy spoon. The form changes, but the function remains. At 11 p.m. on a Saturday night in December 2023, a diner in Providence, Rhode Island, was full. The place was called the Modern Diner, built in 1940 by the Sterling Dining Car Company. It had been designated a National Historic Landmark in 2000. The customers were a mix of college students, families, and truck drivers. The cook was a woman in her 50s who had worked there for 20 years. The waitress was a college student working the night shift. The counter was full of people eating pie. The jukebox played old rock and roll. Outside, the neon sign flickered. Inside, the coffee kept flowing. This scene has played out night after night for nearly a century. The diner is not just a building. It is a ritual. It is a place where people come alone and leave feeling less alone. It is a place where the food is simple, the conversation is easy, and the time passes unnoticed. The diner became a symbol of the country because it represents the best of what America aspired to be: open, affordable, welcoming, independent, and unpretentious. That symbol is fragile. It depends on people showing up. It depends on owners willing to work without financial reward. It depends on communities valuing a place that does not maximize profit. The diner is a test. The question is whether we as a society still want the diner. The answer is not clear. But the fact that people continue to restore old diners, continue to sit at counters, continue to order pie suggests that the desire is still there. The diner will not disappear. It will change shape. It will become rarer. But it will remain a touchstone. The horse-drawn wagon that started it all is gone, but the spirit of that wagon is still on the road. At 8 a.m. on the 21st of March 2020, the owner of the City Diner in Albany, New York, locked the front door. The diner had been open since 1952. It was a classic chrome and neon Paramount model delivered to the lot in 1953. The owner, a man named Frank who had bought the diner in 1995, placed a handwritten sign on the glass: "Closed until further notice. Stay safe. We'll be back." He thought it would be 2 weeks. The state had ordered all restaurants to shut down dine-in service that morning. Takeout was allowed. Frank had never done takeout before. The diner had no online ordering system. The phone number was listed in the yellow pages. He figured he could answer the phone, take orders, and hand bags through the door. But then the governor extended the order. Then the weeks turned into months. By May, Frank had applied for a Paycheck Protection Program loan. It arrived in June. He used it to pay rent, utilities, and a small stipend for his 3 employees. They had all been laid off in March. He called them back one by one. They were hesitant to return. The diner reopened for takeout only in July. The counter stayed empty. The stools sat unused. Frank sat in the back office and looked at the red vinyl seats that had been worn smooth by decades of customers. He wondered if the diner would survive. It did barely. The city diner is still open today, but only for takeout and outdoor seating on a small sidewalk patio. The interior remains closed. The regulars who used to sit at the counter have not come back. Some moved away. Some got sick. Some died. Frank now works 60 hours a week. He does the cooking himself. The grill is the same one installed in 1953. The flat top is blackened and seasoned. The eggs still sizzle when they hit the surface, but the rhythm is different. There is no clatter of plates, no sound of conversation, no bell above the door. The diner has become a ghost of itself. What happened to the city diner is not unique. Across the country, the COVID-19 pandemic struck the diner industry with a force that had not been seen since the Great Depression. Diners were hit especially hard because their business model depends on high volume, low margins, and in-person interaction. A diner makes money by turning tables quickly. A customer orders coffee, a meal, maybe pie. The average ticket is around $12. The profit on that ticket is maybe $3. To stay afloat, a diner needs to serve 300 tickets a day. During the pandemic, that number dropped to 40 or 50. Some diners pivoted to takeout and delivery, but the economics did not work. Delivery apps charge commissions of 15 to 30%. The diner's profit margin was already thin. After the app fee, there was nothing left. Many diners closed permanently within the first 6 months. How could a business that had survived the Depression, the war, and the suburban exodus collapse so quickly? The answer lies in the same characteristics that made diners resilient for a century. Diners were small, family-run operations with little debt. They were nimble and adaptable, but they were also cash-based, low-tech, and dependent on foot traffic. When foot traffic disappeared, there was no backup plan. The digital economy that had grown around them offered no lifeline. A food truck could move to a new location. A fast food chain had drive-thrus. A diner had a fixed building with a fixed address. The only way to survive was to change the building. That meant installing windows for takeout, building a patio, adding a digital menu, setting up an online ordering system. These were investments that many owners could not afford. Some owners tried anyway. In 2021, the owner of the Midtown Diner in St. Louis took out a personal loan to build a walk-up window. The diner had been built in 1946 by the Coleman Dining Car Company. It was a single-wide stainless steel car with 12 stools and 2 booths. The owner, a woman named Alina, had inherited it from her father. She had never taken a loan before. She did not have a website. She did not have a point-of-sale system. She used a cash register from the 1980s. She opened the walk-up window in October 2020. It worked. Customers lined up on the sidewalk. She sold burgers and eggs through the window. She kept the door locked. The interior stayed dark. By the end of 2022, she had paid off the loan. But she had not opened the dining room. She said she was not sure if she ever would. The walk-up window was more efficient. She used half the staff. The profit was higher, but the diner was no longer a diner. It was a takeout stand. The neon sign still read Midtown Diner, but the letters were faded. The building was still there, but what it represented was gone. The pandemic accelerated a process that had already begun. Diners had been declining for decades. The number of classic stainless steel diners in the United States peaked in the 1950s at around 6,000. By the year 2000, that number had dropped to about 2,000. By 2023, it was estimated at 1,500. The pandemic wiped out another 500 in just 2 years. The survivors are different. They are not the same institutions. They have been retrofitted, digitized, and streamlined. They serve the same food but through different channels. The menu has shrunk. The prices have risen. The waitresses who knew your name are gone. The fry cook who could flip eggs in his sleep is retired. The diner that remains is a stripped-down version of itself, but the pandemic is not the only force reshaping the diner. There is also the labor crisis. Diners have always relied on a specific labor force: immigrants, young people, career waitresses, and cooks who learned the trade in the back of a diner. That labor pool has shrunk. Immigration enforcement has tightened. Schools have longer hours. Young people prefer jobs that do not require standing on their feet for 8 hours. Career waitresses have aged out. The average age of a diner cook is now 55. The average age of a diner waitress is 50. They are retiring and no one is replacing them. Diners that want to stay open must pay higher wages. They must offer benefits. They must compete with fast food chains and warehouse jobs that pay $15 an hour. Diners that cannot afford to raise prices are forced to close. At 6 p.m. on a Tuesday in October 2022, the owners of the Avalon Diner in Portland, Oregon posted a note on their website. The diner had been open since 1958. It was a classic Sterling model, all stainless steel with a large sign that said Avalon in cursive neon. The owners had tried to hire a cook for 3 months. They placed ads on Craigslist in the local paper and on job boards. They offered $14 an hour, then 15, then 16. No one applied. The owner, a man named Tom, called a temp agency. The agency sent a cook who lasted 2 days. Tom tried to cook himself, but he had a heart condition. He could not stand at the grill for more than 2 hours. He closed the diner on a Friday. He left the note on the website and the phone unanswered. The neon sign was unplugged. The diner sat empty for 6 months. In April 2023, a real estate developer bought the building. He planned to turn it into a mixed-use development with apartments and a coffee shop. The stainless steel exterior was removed and sold as scrap. The interior was gutted. The stools and counter were auctioned off. The Avalon Diner, which had served its last eggs in October, was gone. This story is not isolated. The labor shortage has forced diners to reduce hours. Many now close by 2 p.m. Some stop serving dinner entirely. Others operate only on weekends. The diner's traditional all-day schedule is no longer sustainable. The idea that a diner is open 24 hours a day is a relic of a different economy. In the 1950s, a night shift at a diner was staffed by a single cook and a single waitress. The cook made about $1 an hour, the waitress made tips, the food was cheap, the overhead was low. The night shift was a loss leader, but it built loyalty. Now a night shift requires at least 3 employees. The minimum wage is higher, the insurance costs more, the customers are fewer. The math no longer works. Meanwhile, the regulatory environment has become more complex. Health codes, labor laws, and zoning restrictions have been layered onto diners over the decades. A diner built in 1947 may have been exempt from certain codes when it was built, but as the decades pass, the standard changes. The building must be brought up to code. That means new electrical wiring, new plumbing, a new grease trap, a new ventilation system. The cost of retrofitting a classic diner can exceed the purchase price. In 2019, the owners of the Woodside Diner in Queens, New York, were told by the city that their building needed a new exhaust system. The estimate was $80,000. The diner was valued at $120,000. The owners sold it to a developer who demolished it and built a high-rise. The diner was replaced by luxury condos. The diner is also competing with a new kind of restaurant. Fast casual chains like Sweetgreen, Dig-In, and Cava offer healthy food, digital ordering, and fast service. They are designed for the same customer base that used to eat at diners: busy workers, families, single people. But these chains offer something the diner cannot: consistency, speed, and digital convenience. The food is standardized, the ordering is automated. The customer never has to talk to a human unless they want to. The diner, by contrast, requires conversation. The waitress must take the order, the cook must hear it, the customer must wait. In an economy that values efficiency, the diner is inefficient. Yet even as the diner fades from the landscape, its image remains powerful. The diner appears in movies, television shows, and advertising as a shorthand for simplicity, authenticity, and community. It is used to sell cars, insurance, and cereal. The image of a neon sign over a stainless steel building with a red counter and a line of stools is instantly recognizable. It triggers a sense of nostalgia for a time that never quite existed, a past that has been sanitized and simplified. This image sells well. It sells because the real thing is disappearing. The diner is more valuable as a symbol than as a business. This is a strange reversal. For decades, the diner was a practical building. It served cheap food, it served a purpose. Now it is a museum piece. The buildings that remain are treated as relics. They are photographed, documented, and preserved, but they are not operated as they once were. They are operated as destinations. They charge higher prices. They sell merchandise. They host events. They cater to tourists who want to experience a piece of history. The regulars who used to sit at the counter and talk about the weather are pushed out by the prices. The diner becomes a diorama. The human cost is real. The waitress who worked at the same diner for 40 years lost her job when the diner closed. She did not have a pension. She did not have savings. She went to work at a department store for minimum wage. The cook who had been frying eggs for 30 years could not find another job. He had no formal training. He had no resume. He aged out of the workforce. The regulars, the people who came every morning, lost their third place. They lost the only social interaction they had. They stayed home. They became isolated. At 10 a.m. on the first Sunday in December 2024, a small crowd gathered outside the Union Diner in Union, New Jersey. The diner had been closed for 3 years. The building was still standing, but the neon sign was gone. The interior had been stripped. The new owner, a nonprofit organization, had purchased it for $1. The building had been donated by the previous owner who could not afford to renovate it. The nonprofit planned to turn it into a community center. They would restore the exterior, keep the counter and stools, but use the space for meetings, classes, and events. The diner would no longer serve food. It would no longer be a diner. It would be a monument to a diner. The crowd that gathered that morning included former employees, former customers, and local officials. They held a small ceremony. They unveiled a plaque. The plaque read, Union Diner 1946 to 20 Twoon, a place where everyone was welcome. May the spirit of the diner live on. But does the spirit live on? That is the question. The diner was never just a building. It was a set of relationships. It was a transaction between a cook and a customer that happened over a plate of eggs. It was a conversation between a waitress and a regular that happened over a cup of coffee. It was a moment of connection between strangers who shared a counter. That spirit cannot be preserved in a plaque. It cannot be restored in a community center. It can only be recreated by the act of running a diner. And running a diner is harder now than it has ever been. The diner will not disappear entirely. There will always be a few. They will be outliers. They will be subsidized by private wealth or by community support. They will be beloved. They will be photographed, but they will not be the norm. The diner as a mass market institution is gone. Its replacement is not another type of restaurant. Its replacement is the home kitchen, the microwave, the food delivery app. The diner was a public place. The replacement is a private screen. In the final analysis, the diner became a symbol of the country because it embodied a set of values that America claimed to hold: openness, equality, hard work, independence. Those values are still claimed, but they are practiced differently now. The diner offered a space where anyone could walk in and be served without judgment. That space has been replaced by algorithms that decide who gets what service and at what price. The diner offered a job to anyone who wanted to work, regardless of education or background. That opportunity has been replaced by a gig economy that treats labor as a disposable commodity. The diner offered a meal that was affordable, filling, and familiar. That meal has been replaced by 1,000 options that are cheaper, faster, and more convenient, but also more isolated. The story of the American diner is the story of a building that became a symbol because it was a place where people were together. That togetherness is what we miss. It is what we are trying to preserve even as the building crumbles. The diner is gone, but the memory of it remains, and that memory might be enough to inspire something new. The food truck is a diner on wheels. The pop-up is a diner that moves. The community cafe is a diner that serves local food. The diner's DNA is scattered across the landscape. It will recombine in ways we cannot predict. The horse-drawn wagon that started it all is gone. But the spirit of that wagon is still on the road. At 7:14 a.m. on the 15th of October 2023, the wrecking ball struck the side of the Dixie Queen Diner in El Paso, Texas. The building was a 1950 Sterling Streamliner, a classic model with stainless steel siding, a neon sign shaped like a coffee cup, and a long counter with 20 stools. The diner had been closed for 2 years. The owner, Maria Hernandez, stood across the street. She had the keys in her pocket. She had not handed them over to the demolition crew. She wanted to be there when it came down. The first impact sent a crack through the front window. The second impact took down the sign. The third impact collapsed the roof. Within an hour, the diner was a pile of metal and rubble. A crew loaded the debris onto flatbed trucks. By noon, the lot was empty. The diner was gone. What happened? The Dixie Queen was not an isolated case. It was part of a wave that crested between 2020 and 2024. The pandemic did not kill the diner. It delivered the final blow to a patient that had been in decline for years. The diner's business model had been eroding since the 1990s. The margins were thin, the labor was scarce, the customers were aging. The pandemic accelerated every trend at once. When the Texas governor ordered all restaurants to close their dining rooms in March 2020, the Dixie Queen had no infrastructure for takeout, no online ordering system, no delivery contract, no separate entrance for curbside pickup. Maria tried to set up a simple window at the back door, but the city health department required a separate ventilation hood and a hand-washing sink. The cost was $20,000. She did not have it. She closed the doors on March 17, 2020, thinking it would be temporary. She reopened for a short period in June of that year, but only 20% of her previous customers returned. She closed again in September. She never reopened. The diner's location had also shifted. The neighborhood around the Dixie Queen had changed. In the 1970s, the diner sat on a busy state highway lined with motels, gas stations, and small businesses. Truck drivers, traveling salesmen, and local families stopped in. Area was a commercial corridor. By 2020, the highway had been bypassed by a new interstate. The motels had become low-income apartments. The gas stations had closed. The small businesses had been replaced by big box stores 3 miles away. The foot traffic was gone. The diner was stranded on a road that no one traveled. How could a diner survive in a location like that? For a few years, it survived because of its reputation. Regulars drove from across the city to eat at the Dixie Queen. But those regulars were getting older. The youngest regulars were in their 50s. The oldest were in their 80s. They stopped driving. They moved into nursing homes. They passed away. New customers did not replace them. The menu was unchanged since the 1970s. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, pancakes, burgers, meatloaf, chicken, fried steak. No salads, no wraps, no avocado toast, no gluten-free options. The younger generation did not look for that menu. They looked for something healthier, faster, or more exotic. The diner could not compete. The labor problem was just as severe. Maria had employed the same cook for 30 years. He retired in 2008. She could not find a replacement. She advertised on Craigslist, placed a sign in the window, offered a signing bonus. No one applied. She tried to train a young cook from a local culinary school. He lasted 2 weeks. He said the work was too repetitive, the hours too long, the pay too low. She ended up cooking herself, working 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. She was 58 years old. She developed back problems. She had no health insurance. The diner was bleeding money. She was bleeding energy. The true cost of running a diner had been hidden for decades. The owners worked 12-hour shifts, often more. They paid themselves nothing or next to nothing. They relied on family labor. The profit came from volume, not margin. A diner that served 300 meals a day could make a modest living. A diner that served 100 meals a day was losing money. The Dixie Queen had served 300 meals a day in 1.85. By 2019, it served 80. The average ticket was $10. The cost of food was $4. The cost of labor was $4. The rent was $3,000 a month. The utilities were $1,500. The equipment repairs were unpredictable. The math did not work. Maria was losing about $2,000 a month. She was covering the loss with her savings. By 2020, her savings were gone. The regulatory environment added more weight. In 2015, the city of El Paso updated its fire code. All commercial kitchens were required to install an automatic fire suppression system. The cost was $12,000. Maria had to take out a loan. In 2017, the county health department required a new grease trap. The cost was $8,000. In 2019, the Americans with Disabilities Act required a ramp at the front entrance. The cost was $6,000. Each regulation made sense individually. Together, they formed a wall that the diner could not climb. The diner had been built in 1953. It was not designed for modern codes. Every upgrade was a retrofit. Every retrofit was expensive. After a certain point, the building was worth less than the cost of bringing it up to code. This is the story of thousands of diners across the country. They are not being killed by a single event. They are being worn down by decades of accumulated pressure. The pandemic was the final straw, but the load was already unbearable. The diner is not a profitable business in the modern economy. It is a labor of love, and love does not pay the bills, but there is something deeper at work. The diner thrived in an era when Americans had a different relationship with food and with time. In the 1950s and 60s, eating out was a treat. The diner was a special place. By the 1980s, eating out had become routine. The diner was a convenience. By the 2000s, eating out had become a habit. The diner was one option among many. The younger generation grew up with fast food chain restaurants and food delivery apps. The diner did not fit their habits. They did not sit at a counter. They did not make small talk with strangers. They did not wait for a cooked meal. They wanted speed, consistency, and choice. The diner offered the opposite. It was inconsistent. It had a limited menu. The cultural shift is reflected in the data. In 1980, the average American ate out about 3 times a week. By 2020, that number had doubled. But the market share of independent restaurants like diners had shrunk. Most of the growth went to chains. Fast food chains, fast casual chains, casual dining chains. The diner was a mom-and-pop operation. It could not compete with the marketing budgets, supply chains, and real estate strategies of large corporations. A chain can open a location, close it, and open another. A diner is rooted. It lives or dies with its building. The building itself became a liability. The classic diner is a prefabricated structure. It was designed to be portable. In the early days, diners were moved from one lot to another. But by the 1970s, most diners had been bolted to foundations. They could not be moved without destroying them. The buildings were old, they were inefficient, they lacked insulation, they had single-pane windows, they were expensive to heat and cool. The stainless steel exterior required constant maintenance. The neon signs leaked gas. The roofs leaked. The diner was a beautiful machine, but it was a machine that required constant tuning. And the parts were no longer made. The original manufacturers had gone out of business. Replacement parts had to be custom fabricated. The cost was prohibitive. By the early 2000s, the diner had become a building that was more valuable as a piece of real estate than as a restaurant. In many cities, the land under the diner was worth more than the diner itself. Developers would buy the property, demolish the diner, and build a multi-story apartment building or a parking lot. The diner was an obstacle to profit. This happened in Denver, in Portland, in Atlanta, in Nashville. The owners were offered sums they could not refuse. They sold. The diner vanished. At 3:15 p.m. on the 22nd of November 2024, the last customer walked out of the 24-hour diner in downtown St. Louis. The diner had been open continuously since 1948. It survived the decline of the neighborhood, the riots of 1968, the crack epidemic of the 1980s, and the Great Recession of 2008. It did not survive the pandemic and the aftermath. The owner, a man named George Costas, had kept the diner open through sheer stubbornness. He had no employees for the last 6 months. He cooked, served, and cleaned by himself. He was 72 years old. He had a heart condition. His doctor told him to stop. He did not listen, but the city health department shut him down for a violation he could not fix. The floor had a crack. The concrete had deteriorated. The repair estimate was $40,000. George did not have it. He closed the door at 4 p.m. He walked away. The building was sold to a developer who planned to build a parking garage. The closure of the 24-hour diner was notable because it was one of the last true 24-hour diners in the country. The 24-hour diner was a uniquely American institution. It was open for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the hours in between. It served night shift workers, early morning commuters, college students studying late, insomniacs, and people who needed a place to sit and think. The 24-hour diner was a refuge. It was a place where time did not matter. The coffee was always on, the eggs were always available, the door was unlocked. The economics of the 24-hour diner were brutal. The late night and early morning hours were rarely profitable. The overhead from lights, heat, and labor outweighed the revenue. But the owners kept the doors open because they believed in the mission. They believed that someone needed a place to go. That belief was a luxury that the modern economy could not afford. The business model required a certain density of population and a certain culture of late-night activity. Both had declined. Cities became more expensive. The night shift became automated. The college students studied online. The insomniacs stayed home with their phones. The need for a 24-hour diner evaporated. The diner was also a victim of its own success as a symbol. The image of the diner was co-opted by corporations. Denny's, IHOP, Waffle House, and other chains built restaurants that looked like diners but operated like factories. They offered the same menu of pancakes, eggs, and coffee, but they did it with corporate efficiency. The independent diner could not compete on price. A Denny's could afford to sell a Grand Slam breakfast for $5 because it had a national supply chain and economies of scale. The independent diner paid more for eggs, more for bacon, more for coffee. The independent diner had to charge $7 or $8 for the same meal. Customer chose the cheaper option. The independent diner lost. Even the Waffle House, which is often considered the closest modern equivalent to the classic diner, has a fundamentally different model. Waffle House is a franchise. It has standardized menus, standardized equipment, standardized training. It can open a new location in a week. The classic diner was an individual creation. Each one was slightly different. The menu reflected the owner's tastes. The decor reflected the location. The regulars shaped the atmosphere. That individuality was the diner's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. It could not be scaled, it could not be replicated, it could only be experienced in one place at one time with one group of people. When that place closed, the experience was gone. At 6:22 p.m. on the 12th of February 2025, a fire broke out in the kitchen of the Silver Moon Diner in Baltimore. The fire started in a grease buildup in the hood. The sprinklers were outdated. The flames spread to the ceiling. The fire department arrived in 6 minutes, but the roof was already burning. The building was a 193's Worcester lunch car, one of the oldest surviving diners in the Mid-Atlantic. It had been designated a historic landmark in 1987. The fire caused extensive damage. The diner was insured, but the insurance policy would not cover the cost of restoration. The historic designation meant that any repairs had to meet strict standards. The cost of restoring a 193's diner to its original state was astronomical. The owner could not afford it. He sold the salvageable parts to a collector. The rest was demolished. The Silver Moon Diner was gone. The loss of historic diners is a cultural cost that is hard to quantify. These buildings are physical records of a way of life. They are evidence of a time when manufacturing was local, when design was thoughtful, when a building could be both functional and beautiful. The diner was a piece of industrial art. It was mass-produced but not soulless. The interiors were designed to be welcoming. The lighting was warm, the stools were comfortable, the counters were polished, the jukebox played records. The diner was a space that had been crafted, not assembled. That craftsmanship is irreplaceable. And yet the diner is not gone, it is being transformed. The same forces that destroyed the classic diner are creating new forms. In Portland, Oregon, a group of young chefs opened a pop-up diner that operates out of a retrofitted shipping container. The menu is classic diner food but with local ingredients. They serve eggs from a nearby farm, bacon from heritage pigs, and hash browns made from hand-cut potatoes. The price is higher. The portions are smaller, but the space is full every weekend. In Austin, Texas, a food truck called the Paper Plate Diner uses a repurposed 1960's travel trailer. The counter is a fold-down table. The stools are folding chairs. The menu is printed on a chalkboard. The owner, a former line cook, says she wants to capture the feeling of a diner without the burden of a building. She opens at 6 a.m. and closes when she runs out of food. She has a following. In Brooklyn, New York, a diner called Gertrude's reopened in 2023 after being closed for 5 years. The new owners are a collective of former restaurant workers. They raised money through a crowdfunding campaign. They renovated the interior, keeping the original counter and stools but adding a new kitchen, a new HVAC system, and a wheelchair ramp. They pay all employees a living wage. They offer health insurance. They have a menu that includes vegan options. The diner is profitable. It is also a cooperative. The workers own a share of the business. The customers are a mix of old regulars and new residents. The diner is not just a place to eat. It is a community project. These experiments are small. They do not replace the thousands of diners that have closed, but they show that the spirit of the diner can adapt. The form changes, the core remains. The diner was never about the building. It was about the transaction between the cook and the customer. It was about the waitress who knew your name. It was about the regular who sat at the same stool every morning. Those transactions can happen in a shipping container, in a food truck, in a cooperative. The building was a vessel. The vessel can be rebuilt. But there is a warning in the story of the diner. The diner was a product of a specific economic and social moment. It required cheap rent, cheap labor, cheap food, and a community that valued face-to-face interaction. Those conditions are no longer the norm. The shipping container diner works because it is mobile and low overhead. The food truck diner works because it is seasonal and limited. The cooperative diner works because it is subsidized by its members. These are not mass-market solutions. They are niche operations. The diner as a mass-market institution is gone. What remains is the diner as a boutique experience. The horse-drawn wagon that started it all is gone, but the spirit of that wagon is still on the road. It is passing through new neighborhoods, offering food to new customers, creating new connections. The spirit is resilient, the form is not. The lesson of the American diner is that a symbol can outlive its original function. The symbol of the diner will continue to be used in advertising, in film, in art. It will continue to evoke feelings of nostalgia, of comfort, of home. But the real diner, the one with the cracked linoleum and the worn counter and the waitress who called you honey, that diner exists now only in memory. And memory, like the diner itself, is a fragile thing. It fades, it is replaced, it becomes something else. The next symbol of America will not be a building, it might be a phone screen, it might be a drone, it might be a shared algorithm. The diner belongs to the past. The future belongs to something we cannot yet name. But for a few decades, in the middle of the 20th century, the diner was the most American thing of all. It was a place where strangers became neighbors. It was a place where everyone was welcome. It was a place that served breakfast at any hour. It was a place that never closed. And when it closed for the last time, a part of the country closed with it. At 7:14 a.m. on the 17th of March 2024, a white delivery van pulled up outside the Eastside Diner in Detroit. The driver stepped out with a clipboard. He was from the city's Department of Buildings, Safety Engineering, and Environmental Enforcement. The diner had been operating continuously since 1955. It was a classic Silk City model, built in 1948 with a stainless steel exterior and a neon sign that still worked. The driver took photographs, measured the frontage, and left a notice taped to the door. The notice cited a violation of the city's new energy code. The diner's heating system, a gas-fired unit from 1962, did not meet current efficiency standards. The owner had 90 days to replace it or face fines of $500 per day. The owner, a 73-year-old woman named Dorothy, had inherited the diner from her father in 1987. She had never missed a day of work. The cost of replacing the heating system was estimated at $42,000. The diner's annual profit was roughly $30,000. Dorothy could not afford the upgrade. She could not get a loan because the building's foundation had cracks and the bank considered it a liability. She tried to sell the business. No one would buy it. The Eastside Diner closed on the 14th of June 2024. The sign was removed and sold to a collector in Ohio for $500. The building was demolished in September. The lot is now a parking space for a nearby warehouse. How could a diner that had survived riots, recession, and a pandemic be killed by a heating system? The answer is not simple. It involves overlapping failures, municipal codes written for new construction, historic preservation laws that offered no financial support, a banking system that undervalued small businesses, and a generation of owners who aged out without successors. Dorothy had no children. She had no one to take over. The diner was her life. When she retired, the diner died with her. The Eastside Diner was not an outlier. Across the country, diners are closing not because of a single crisis, but because of accumulated pressure. The American diner was built on a model of low margins and high volume. That model required cheap labor, cheap rent, and cheap food. Those conditions no longer exist. Minimum wage has risen in most states. Rent in urban areas has tripled or quadrupled since the 1990s. The cost of eggs, bacon, and coffee has increased faster than inflation. A diner that charges $8 for a breakfast platter cannot survive if its labor costs are $4 and its food costs are $3. The profit margin is $1. That dollar must cover utilities, insurance, repairs, taxes, and the owner's salary. It is not enough. The only way to make a diner profitable today is to sell alcohol, extend hours, or raise prices. But raising prices pushes away the core customers, working people who need a cheap meal. The diner becomes a boutique, and a boutique is not a diner. The question then becomes, what is the diner's future? The answer, based on current trends, is that the classic diner will continue to disappear. The remaining diners will be either historic tourist attractions, high-end reinterpretations, or small community cooperatives. The scale of the loss is already visible. In 1950, there were an estimated 6,000 diners in the United States. By 2020, fewer than 1,000 remained. By 2030, that number could drop below 500. The diner will not vanish completely, it will become rare, and rarity changes meaning. A rare object is no longer a shared symbol. It becomes a curiosity, a relic, a thing to be photographed and posted rather than lived in. The diner as a daily gathering place, as a public square, as a home away from home, will exist only in memory. And yet memory is powerful. Even as the physical diners disappear, the idea persists. The idea of a place where everyone is welcome, where the coffee is always hot, where the cook knows how you like your eggs, where the waitress calls you honey, that idea is not tied to a building. It is tied to a feeling. That feeling can be recreated in a food truck, in a pop-up, in a cooperative. It can be recreated by anyone who understands that hospitality is not a transaction but a relationship. The diner may die as a form, but the spirit that animated it will find new vessels.